got your headsets or we're missing one?
Okay. Is he working on it or? Seems to me that he has forgotten to put mics on.
Yeah, but accidentally they gave it to Tawakkol, and Tawakkol is not on the program till way later in the program. So
Okay, so she's sitting here.
sorry, yes, yeah. So we're all sitting here, and it's just a All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. On behalf of Stellenbosch University, our Division Student Affairs, our Center for Student Life and Learning, and the Frederick van Zyl-Slabbert Institute, we'd like to welcome you officially to the 6th International Youth Think Tank, and also the first one hosted outside of Europe and in Africa. We have a few partners that made this wonderful opportunity, from a dream to actual conceptualization to implementation. So that would be the Norwegian Nobel Institute, the International Youth Think Tank, and also our local host here at STIAS. So on behalf of all of them, we hope that you will enjoy your time with us during the week, and that you will also come back on Thursday afternoon to listen to the presentations from our 2024 cohort. We will do official welcoming notes as we go along the program. The purpose of the first panel discussion, not discussion really, welcoming, is to give each of our different partners an opportunity to officially welcome you. First, I would like to welcome Professor Deresh Ramjugernath, our Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Learning and Teaching. Then following him will be Professor Edward Kirumira. He's the Director of STIAS here at Stellenbosch. Thirdly, Mr. Christian Fogelström, who is the Deputy Head of Mission, Embassy of Sweden here in South Africa. And then next to me is my fellow Scientific Organizing Committee team member, Professor Olav Njølstad from the Norwegian Nobel Institute. So I'm going to hand over to Prof. Deresh. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. October. Good morning, everyone. It's absolutely fantastic to see all of you. And a good morning as well to my fellow panelists and to all the distinguished guests and speakers that we have here this morning, and to our esteemed colleagues as well. But most importantly, a very warm welcome and good morning to our inspiring International Youth Think Tank participants. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you to Stellenbosch University, and in particular to STIAS, the Stellenbosch Institute for Advanced Study, for this, the 6th International Youth Think Tank Conference. Now today, we're coming together not just to discuss ideas, but to reflect on the vital role that the youth think tanks play in shaping the future of global democracy. Now, as Dr. October has mentioned, that this event, which was founded in 2019, has been hosted at various cities in Europe over the last 5 years, and it strives to challenge the youth. And when I say youth, I'm referring to the age group between 18 and 28, to engage on global democracy issues. Now, we are especially proud as Stellenbosch University, and I would say as a municipality of Stellenbosch, but South Africa and Africa, to be hosting this event for the first time on the African continent. I've been told that there have been more than 200 applications that were received for the event, and you are the amazing 24, the amazing 24 participants that were selected for this event. Now, we are grateful to the Wallenberg Foundation for funding this event, which has been organized by the International Youth Think Tank and Stellenbosch University in cooperation with the Norwegian Nobel Institute, and as I said, is hosted at STIAS, and Edward will do the welcome on behalf of STIAS. Now, this opportunity to host the event in Stellenbosch is, as has been mentioned, the mastermind, if I want to call it that, of a convener, Professor Urban Strandberg, and the managing director and co-founder of the International Youth Think Tank, and he's also a professor in law at the University of Gothenburg. And I was sharing with him that I spent a fair bit of time in Sweden and in Gothenburg in the last few decades, as well as our colleague at Stellenbosch University, Dr. Heidi October. She's the head of our Frederick van Zyl-Slabbert Institute for Student Leadership and Development, as well as our deputy director for student leadership in the Center for Student Life and Learning. So they met in Gothenburg in December of 2023 to cement the exploration of a potential partnership with the Frederick van Zyl-Slabbert Institute, and here we are today. So Dr. October, as has been mentioned, is the convener, and she's been part of the scientific committee together with Prof. Njølstad, who's the director of the Norwegian Nobel Institute. Now, this purposeful partnership falls in line with our vision as Stellenbosch University. At Stellenbosch University, we have a vision which we call Vision 2040, which will be that our university will be Africa's leading research-intensive university, globally recognized as excellent, inclusive, and innovative. But here are the key words: where we advance knowledge in service of society. And in the Frederick van Zyl-Slabbert Institute, they also have a vision which aligns to the vision of Stellenbosch University, and that is to support the development of leadership in Africa with a view to cultivate active citizens who contribute to a socially just and sustainable society. So this is a real strong partnership that we're forming now between the Frederick van Zyl-Slabbert Institute, which is dealing with global network, with leadership programs and offerings, and that particular institute honors the legacy of the late Dr. van Zyl-Slabbert, and with the main aim of stimulating critical dialogue on democracy and citizenship issues. Now, we are in a world that is increasingly interconnected, with many challenges we face as a global community that are complex, that are multifaceted, and that are often daunting. Now, you look at it from a climate change to an economic inequality perspective, from a social justice to a technological disruption perspective, or the issues of our time demand innovative solutions and fresh perspectives. And it is here that I believe that the youth think tanks have emerged as a powerful catalyst for change. Now, if you look at it, historically, youth have been at the forefront of transformative movements. The energy, the creativity, the idealism of young people have sparked revolutions, have advanced civil rights, have redefined the very concept of democracy. And today, however, we have some challenges. The landscape is a little different. We live in an era where there is information abundance, yet I have to say at times wisdom is scarce. So this is where voices are many, yet true dialogue is rare. So in this environment, the youth think tanks are not just relevant, they are essential. So they provide a structured platform for young people like yourselves to engage with complex global issues. They're incubators of ideas, spaces where rigorous research meets innovative thinking. But beyond that, they're the training grounds for the next generation of leaders. Leaders who understand that democracy is not just about casting a vote, but about engaging in a meaningful, informed, and sustained participation. So I want you to seize this moment with urgency that it demands, engage with the issues, not just as not as passive observers, but as active participants. Use your collective voice to advocate for a more just, a more equitable, and a more sustainable world. And more importantly, let's remember that democracy is never a finished product, but a living, breathing process, one that must be continuously nurtured, defended, and reimagined. I welcome you once again to this important forum on behalf of Stellenbosch University. May your discussions over the next few days inspire action, may your debates spark innovation, and may your collective efforts contribute to the strengthening of global democracy for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Ramjugernath. We'll then go on to Prof. Kirumira.
Thank you very much, and good morning. What is happening? You know, when I was asked to host this event, I looked at the age bracket, and I thought that I don't belong to that age bracket. But when I woke up in the morning, I felt youth. And so with the youthfulness that I feel now, I would like to warmly welcome you to Stellenbosch Institute for Advanced Study. Thank you very much for honoring us to have this event in this space. Our motto at Stellenbosch Institute for Advanced Study is the creative space for the mind. That's it. Creative space for the mind, that's what we provide, that's what we give, that is our currency in creating spaces within which individuals, young, old, middle-aged, can meet and exchange ideas and share and contribute and give and receive. I am looking forward to this event, the first actually of the kind at STIAS, where we're hosting young people or youth, because our programs usually start from postdoc, and those are the individuals that we have here as the eye of tomorrow. But you now letting us know that the eye of tomorrow are not the postdoc, they are you. And so this is an opportunity for us to learn from you, because you're not the leaders of tomorrow, you are the leaders of today. The leaders of tomorrow are the children. The youth are the leaders of today. And as you discuss and as you converse and as you engage, I would want to invite you to look at yourselves as our leaders today. And therefore the ideas, the conversations that you're going to have in the course of this week are ideas that we need to embrace as of today. So thank you very much, the IYTT, thank you very much for the Nobel Institute, and thank you very much for the Deputy Ambassador. They've been very, very supportive in the convening of our symposia, and thank you. So convey through you also to the Swedish, and I would say the Norwegian and Danish community. I've been associated with these three, so I know the bit of nice banter that goes on between the three. But I'll dare that the representative of the Swedish Embassy in South Africa can convey our appreciation on your behalf, the possibility that we can create spaces for the mind, and we can create these spaces within which young people can bring ideas on the table uncensored. And I'm looking forward to that and feeding into the program that we run at STIAS. So again, welcome, and please make me feel youth. Thank you.
I hope the think tankers are up for that invitation. Thank you very much. Now over to you, Mr. Forberstra.
Thank you very much. We try this again. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Very good. Very good. Very good. Directors, Vice Chancellors, it's a pleasure to be here. Let me begin by expressing my sincere appreciation to the organizers, to Urban for reaching out to us, and all the partners for inviting us at the embassy to be part of this extremely interesting and important conference. It has so many Swedish connotations, everything from Nobel to STIAS, Wallenbergs, the V-Dem Institute for Democracy, and key speakers. So it makes us proud representing Sweden and the Swedish Embassy here. I work at the Swedish Embassy in Pretoria. I hope that this can really be a start of a partnership, of a friendship with all of you participants here today. You are really the hope and the indispensable young, bright minds, as it was formulated in the program, that will shape not only the future, but also today's societies and democracies. And we want to be close to you. We want to continue this conversation. We do a lot relating to democracy, and we have a lot of engagements and events, and we want to be partnering with you in the future. So please reach out. I have a lot of cards with me, and I will be with you for some of the events during the coming days. Young people, students, and academia are really the important focus groups for all we do at the embassy. And this is built on the very realization that you are the ones that have the power and the drive to shape today's and tomorrow's sustainable, equitable, democratic societies. At the same time, we see with great worry that there are also trends where young people are losing faith and hope in that democracy can deliver for them. And I believe that the ideas and the perspectives that you can bring here is key in changing this. And strengthening democracy is also a top priority for the Swedish government as such. Our world is facing a new and dangerous reality. Authoritarian forces are challenging the rules-based order, trying to establish the principles of might is right. This brings disastrous consequences. We experience this in our close neighborhood right now. As we commemorated Ukraine's independence last week, it was about 900 days since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which continues to cause immense humanitarian and human suffering while destabilizing the European continent with repercussions, as you know, felt all around the world. But democracies are strong, and we know why. Democracies built on equality, trust, and social security are more resilient and much less prone to armed conflicts. There can be no compromise on these principles. We cannot achieve sustainable peace and security merely through political transactions. Democracies deliver more peace and stronger economies than autocratic societies and countries. And the past decade have brought large changes: globalization, digitalization, the climate crisis, and citizens are right to demand better responses to these changes and challenges. And the Swedish government acknowledges that democracies need to continue to deliver for our citizens. And coming back to us at the embassy, we can play a part in this by in all ways possible promote discussions on what democracy needs to be and what we can learn from each other around the world where we are present. And we are present in more than 100 countries. And responding to global democratic challenges, Sweden has increased its support to human rights and democracy defenders, from Belarusian democratic forces to human rights defenders here in Southern Africa. We are actively countering the pushback against gender equality, sexual and reproductive health and rights. We're actually hosting a team working regionally on those issues at the Swedish Embassy, and the human rights of the LGBTIQ persons. We are promoting and protecting internet and media freedom and joining efforts to counter cyber threats. An open and enlightened global conversation on how we can harness new technologies for the benefit of everyone is needed, while we at the same time mitigate the risks. Our aim must be to ensure that digital technologies work for the promotion of human rights, freedom, and democracy, and not against it. But nothing of this we can do alone. Building alliances among democracies and with different parts of society remains a necessity. And coming up with new ideas and solutions, like you are going to do here over the coming days, is key. So again, let this be a beginning of our friendship, not only with the Embassy of Sweden in South Africa. I'm happy to connect you to our colleagues in other countries in the continent, and I look forward again to spend time with you over the coming days. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our final word of welcome will then come from Prof. Olav Njølstad from the Norwegian Nobel Institute. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Let's try a fourth time. Good morning. As I told you last night when we had our greetings, I feel very excited about this. I'm very experienced with hosting Nobel Symposium. But as I also told you, so far they have been strictly academic gatherings, conferences, where professors, think tank experts are meeting to discuss theoretical issues and matters. This is more exciting. And I will say, echoing my co-panelists, because you are the leaders, and you are the hope. So this is extremely stimulating, I think, for us. And you will engage with each other and with professors and experts, former Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Tawakkol Karman. So you have much to look forward to, I'm sure. But before you go on starting your discussions, let us pause for just 2 seconds and ask one question. Why care about democracy? Isn't it the fact that more and more people are turning their back to democracy, or are denied the opportunity to support democracy? Isn't it the fact that democracy isn't always efficient? Yes, but I think the simple answer is the one that Winston Churchill once gave. He said, democracy has many weaknesses, many shortcomings, but it is the best political system we have. For all its shortcomings, it's far better than any alternative. So that's why we must never lose hope in democracy. And we must never stop defending democracy. However, that is not why my institute and the Norwegian Nobel Committee has supported the struggle for democracy and social justice for many, many years. Even if democracy has an intrinsic value which makes it worthwhile to struggle for democracy in its own right, that is not why the Norwegian Nobel Committee has awarded the Peace Prize to people and organizations who have struggled for democracy, as the committee did in 1960 when they awarded the Peace Prize to Albert Luthuli from South Africa, as they did in 1964 when they awarded the Peace Prize to Martin Luther King, or in 1984 when they awarded the Peace Prize to Bishop Desmond Tutu, or in 1993 when they awarded the Peace Prize to Nelson Mandela and Frederick de Klerk for their effort to get rid of apartheid. The reason was simply that the committee is convinced that democracy and social justice are prerequisites, preconditions, as the Deputy Ambassador just said, for peace. Without social justice, without democracy, peace will not last. So democracy is our best guarantee against civil war. And very extensive research also establishes that it is the best guarantee against war. Not that democracies are necessarily always peaceful. We know of many democracies, great powers, have been rather war-prone. And you know who I'm thinking about. But the good thing is that democracies almost never go to war against each other. They go to war against authoritarian regimes, and they have been involved in colonial wars, but they don't go to war against each other. And the implication of that simple fact is that the more democracy grows in the world, the more it is spread, the more countries that take on democratic regimes, there will be less international conflicts solved by violence and war. So I would like you to keep in mind that the work you are doing in the next coming days is not only about democracy. It's not only about social justice. It is also very, very much about peace. And with those words, I will say good luck to you all, and I look very much forward to listen to you and learn from you in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all of our partners. It's very clear that they are giving their full support and commitment to support our youth think tankers. So I hope that you will take them up on the offer and that you will also engage with them throughout the week. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you, Heidi, and thank you all the panelists for this opening, welcoming words. We are moving on to the keynote of this conference. And I'm extremely proud to present to you Professor Staffan Lindberg, who is actually a colleague of mine at the University of Gothenburg. Staffan is a full professor of political science, but more importantly, he is the director, founder of the V-Dem Institute at the University of Gothenburg, and he's one of the 4 principal investigators and founders of the Varieties of Democracies global venture, which is an amazing thing. He will say a few words himself about the V-Dem, but let me just say that I'm really overwhelmed by what the V-Dem is doing, because they are trying to understand the prerequisites for democracy all over the world by asking experts in different countries of their opinions of democracy in their different contexts. And through comparisons, they will learn and they will, well, give us a broader outlook of the state of democracy of the world. So we have asked Staffan to say a few words to us under the broad heading, the state of democracy of Africa and the world. So contextualize the African situation a little bit. So Staffan will have a 45-minute presentation with slides, and that will be followed up with a Q&A, where all of us in the room and you in the live stream are having the opportunity of saying something to Staffan with comments and questions. So Staffan, warmly welcome.
Thank you, Urban, for those kind words. Good to be here. Good to be back at STIAS. I don't know, a few years ago since I was here. And great to see you all. And you look skeptical. It's especially great to be here because of the occasion with all you young leaders of today, as Professor Kirumira said. I was a youth leader once myself. In 88, 89, I was one of two leaders from Sweden in the international youth movement that set out to contribute to tear down the Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain. And we organized 4,500 youth from all over the Nordic countries in 356 projects together with Russians or citizens of then Soviet Union in September 1989, and then the wall came down in November. So to see and speak to you is a special pleasure. V-Dem, Varieties of Democracy. I'm director of the V-Dem Institute. That's the headquarters. It's a vast international collaboration involving over 4,000 scholars and other experts from 180 countries that contribute to help us measure democracy and in various ways all across the world. It's called Varieties of Democracy for a reason. There's not one model of democracy, we measure several. In all, we have over 600 indicators that measure different parts of democracy and over 70 indices where we aggregate those up. They're all available for you to use. So it's not white men in their 50s like myself that determine how democratic South Africa or Ghana or Ethiopia is, right? So, in this short time, I'm going to take you through the developments for democracy the last 50 years or so, but with a focus on the last 10 to 20 years globally, with also some highlights on Africa. Okay? Right. I'm going to base it on some of these publications that come out of the V-Dem Institute. And the IYTT fellows will also get a copy of the democracy report that you see a lot of the graphs from here. I have a few extra copies if somebody else is interested, and then all these other publications are available online. Now, where are we? I'm going to start with some highlights from this democracy report. Where are we in the world right now? How's it going? Huh? South Africa, not good, yes, correct. So this is a graph using our liberal democracy index. It goes from 0 to 1. You can think of it as 0 to 100, doesn't matter. This is the development of the world from 1973 with a wave of democratization that started in Southern Europe with what? Huh? No. 1974. Yes. Thank you, Olav. Special prize for you. Carnation Revolution in Portugal in 1974. A military coup kind of thing, or mutiny by junior officers that were tired of the colonial war and of oppression at home and participating in that. And then that turned into a social revolution because people went out in the streets and took over it. So that's when this sort of upward trend started. And then we had the end of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And in Africa, from 4 or 5, depending on how you count Senegal, countries holding multi-party elections as of '88. In 1994, 42 countries had started to hold multi-party elections in Africa. It was that wave, that explosion. That's when we were happy, right? Everything was going in the right direction. Right? And then things have started to go down, right? And if we draw a line back here, sort of on this, then we're back here around sort of 1998 again. But that's country averages, right? So you have to think about that. That's a common metric you see. And then it means something. Each country's level of democracy, and then you add that up and you divide it by the number of countries. So each country weighs the same. And that, like in the UN or elsewhere, it sort of seems fair, right? But in terms of how much democracy there is in the world, democracy is ruled by the people. For the people, hopefully, but ruled by the people. One man, one vote, or now also women, right? That's great. So one person, one vote, right? But in this country averages, a large country like, say, India, or in Africa, Nigeria. Nobody knows how many people live in Nigeria, somewhere, but 120 to 150 million, right? But so weigh as much as a country like the Seychelles, with 90,000 inhabitants, right? But in terms of how much democracy there is in the world, 90,000 inhabitants in Seychelles, and they have a lot of democracy now. It's great for them, right? But for the world, does it mean the same as India? With 1.4 billion people, right? Maybe not. So we recalculate these and weigh it for population size, and then it looks like this. So you still have this upward trend, and then here sometime you see this development is much more dramatic down. And by this measure, the world is back to 1985, before the end of the Cold War. It doesn't mean all countries are, and it doesn't mean the world is back to 1987, but the average level of democracy. In terms, you can think of this as a measure of how much democracy an imaginary global citizen enjoy. And then we're back to 1985. We can weigh in other ways, can weigh by territory. By territory, it's sort of similar more to population, so these are big, large countries with large populations, or by GDP. Right? This says something about how much democracy is losing in the world in terms of economic power. Right? Comes from two trends. One is that countries like China, Vietnam, and others have increased their GDP a lot, and a lot more than democracies. But it also comes from that a number of countries have gone back on democracy. So we focus a lot on the population-weighted measures because of the connection with ruled by the people, one person, one vote, or we count one person, so we focus on that a lot. And by that measure, we've had at least 15 years of dramatic decline in democracy. Different metrics will give different measures here. Freedom House say 18 years now. I will show some where it's more like 20 or even 30 years. that doesn't matter, but we know we are in a period of dramatic decline, right? So here's how the world looks like at the end of 2023 with our liberal democracy measure. Maybe no big surprises, but you can see, so darker red is less democratic or more dictatorial, right? And more blue is more democratic. We have South Africa here, of course. But Africa there doesn't look too good. You know that. Together with large swaths of Asia, and of course, you have Russia up there as well. Zooming in on Africa a little bit so you can see, well, you have Gambia and Ghana and South Africa, Lesotho, so on, but it's not looking that pretty. And despite that wave of optimism in the 90s and into the early 2000s, right? A lot of countries started holding multi-party elections, but democracy is much more than just holding elections. They have to be free and fair, right? And not too much vote buying and that sort of stuff, right? You also have to have civil liberties and civil society free. Opposition parties must be free to work and form and criticize the government, media, and so on and so forth. So a lot more must be sort of good enough for it to be democratic. Now, we can look at this from a different perspective. So you've seen this index, 0 to 1, sort of fine-grained. We can take the same underlying data, there are 48 indicators that go into that index, and we can divide the world into sort of big boxes, more sort of coarse way of looking at the world. So you have the closed autocracies, think Eritrea, right? And that sort of thing. And of course, after the military coups here, we have, Mali and Niger and so on. You have these guys, electoral autocracies. So they try to look like democracies, hold multi-party elections, maybe have media freedom and things on the books. But they are either the elections are not good enough, or media freedom is not good enough, or civil society freedom is not good enough, and so on. So you don't qualify as a democracy. There's some countries that are a little sort of gray zone, in between, hard to classify, and then you have electoral democracies, so South Africa is in this category, right? Where you have multi-party elections that are sort of okay, free and fair, and you have sort of okay media freedom and all that kind of stuff. So it's okay, minimum level at least satisfied. And then you have sort of liberal democracies where these things are working really well, but you also have more of checks and balances and a wider protection of a good protection of individual liberties. So if we look at the world from that perspective, this is how the last 50 years look. Yeah, you have your screen over there. I'm sorry. Yeah, okay, good. 1973, so we lost a lot of dictatorships in the world. And we got some more democracies, both liberal and electoral, but also a lot more electoral autocracies. So a lot of the third wave of democratization that started with this Carnation Revolution in Portugal was dictatorships becoming electoral autocracies. A lot of them in Africa, right? And then if we look at what's happened in the last sort of 10, 15 years here, is we got fewer electoral autocracies, but more dictatorships. So electoral autocracies becoming worse, becoming dictatorships by military coups or other means. We got fewer liberal democracies and more electoral democracies. So liberal, really good democracies becoming less democratic. So those are the two big trends in the world. There are two things happening at the same time. Democracies becoming less democratic, and some of them falling down and becoming electoral autocracies. Hungary, for example. India as well now. But also a lot of those that were sort of these electoral autocracies becoming dictatorships. So that's a big sort of trend, and now it's affected a lot of people in the world. Now 71% of the world's population live in non-democratic countries, up from less than half actually only about 20 years ago. So welcome to this bright new world that you are young leaders in. Africa here is the sort of division here you can see is among the sort of less good ones in the world, with only 18% of the population living in one or the other form of democracy. That's not a whole bunch. And when this happens, what is affected most and often first is freedom of expression getting worse. Freedom of expression, individual, but also media, and then actors in civil society. So just to illustrate, but everything about democracy is being affected negatively. So here is a graph. It's a very simple metric. Just count the number of countries that are getting better or worse on different aspects of democracy. So you have the clean elections, but you also have elected officials, freedom of association, expression, constraints, judicial constraints, rule of law, those are the things. This is 10 years ago. And if you're above this line, then more countries are getting better than are getting worse. So it's just a simple count. So almost everything about democracy even 10 years ago was still getting better. So clean elections, for example, in 2013, over the past 10 years then, had become better in 23 countries and worse in only 10. Right? So it was still moving forward. Compare this to the end of 2023. Boom. They're almost all below the line, right? And worst of all out here, freedom of expression, but now also clean elections. Getting worse in many more countries than it's getting better. And this is a part of a new trend, or you see that the wannabe dictators are getting bolder. So they are starting to also sort of openly undermine the free and fairness of elections. We can, sorry, I should, anyway. So these are still indices, aggregates of a number of indicators. The clean elections have 12 indicators, right? For everything from vote buying and so on. We can drill down with V-Dem's data then, even down to the individual indicators to see which ones are being affected the most. So here's the top 10 list across all the indicators, what is getting worse in the most countries. And at the top there, you have things that have to do with freedom of expression, right? Government's efforts at censoring the media. Freedom of academic and cultural expression, you're part of that, right? Harassment of journalists. Government censorship effort getting worse in 45 countries over the past 10 years. But also, your critical role, civil society. Repression of civil society and repression of the media are the two things that are typically affected the most and the worst. Why? Well, it's not rocket science. If you or I are a wannabe dictator, what do you want to do first? You want to push down the guys that can scream about what you're doing. That's the media and civil society. But you also want to get at civil society for another reason, because civil society can bring out people in the streets. Mass protest. Every wannabe dictator, at least after all these cold revolutions and so on, know that getting mass protests out in the street, that can be a kiss of death for the regime. So there is a method to the madness here going on. Okay, so then we looked at the state, but also looked at what are the countries that are right now in change, right? Right now, which are the countries that from whatever level they are in democracy, they are getting worse or getting better? So here is a map showing that. And you can see that there are very few places in the world. Well, Brazil is a recent now good example of sort of turning things around with getting Bolsonaro out of power. But other than that, there are not that many blue-colored countries. Zambia, of course, is another sort of good recent example of this U-turn. I will come back to that in a moment. But there's red all across the world, right? It's a global trend. It's not just one part of the world, but it's Europe, it's Africa, it's the Americas, it's Asia, everywhere. In Africa, here are the countries that in the last 10 years have gone down on and are right now in change, losing out on democracy. And Gambia, Zambia, Tunisia, a little bit of democratization, hard to say. I mean, it's really, really marginal, just getting a parliament back in place, basically, where in an election where 11% of the population participated. So, not too much. But Zambia, really good development in the last few years, of course, a little bit in Benin as well, in Gambia. But it's not a very rosy picture. About 35% of the world population now live in countries that are in decline. So a third of the world's people are experiencing autocratization, the opposite to democratization. Okay, and we can look at this in numbers over the past 50 years. Again, here is sort of the blue countries are, every year we count how many countries are in change, right? And here's a third wave of democratization, and there at the point there were 70 countries at the same time moving towards democracy, right? That's where we were really happy, right? And down to 18. And now the number of countries autocratizing increasing, and this is what we call now the third wave of autocratization, up to 47. So in this, at about 20 years, we've had this wave of autocratization increasing in the world. There's a little dip there at the end, 42, a little upward, that were 18, from 16 to 18. We're very careful not to say, oh, the tide has turned. Right? Because the methodology we use is, if you like, a bit conservative, as it should be. Science should be conservative. So it takes, we have a pretty high bar for saying that statistically we know that this country now is in autocratization. So they can start to change, slide down. But it's not enough for us to say, okay, this is statistically we know that this is certain. Until they reach a certain point. So there are a number of countries that have in the last few years starting to slide down, but they haven't qualified yet to be part of the number here. So that number 42 could easily increase. I can tell you there are 25 more countries that are near misses, that have started to autocratize, but they don't qualify by the methodology yet. Okay. And this is depressing, right? So autocratization can start either in a democracy or an autocracy, as we talked about, the electoral autocracy is getting worse. If we only look at the countries that were democracies when the process started, there were 28 of the 42 right now in change. Only about half of them remain democracies. So the death toll, if you like, is pretty high. The fatality rate, and we looked at this for the entire period from 1900. We looked at all instances of autocratization starting in democracies. Only 77%, only 23% survived. 77% democracy broke down. So just a statistical probability that in a country like South Africa, if you start to have autocratization, that you will survive as a democracy is very low. A lot of work for you to be done. But we've learned new things. So here's a new thing in this year's report that we haven't had in earlier years. We see that there are different types of autocratization, right? So we have the ones that we sort of call standalone. Countries that have been a democracy or electoral autocracy maybe, but for a long time, relatively stable. Think India, right? And then when Modi comes into power and BJP, and then they start to autocratize. And then we have these other bell turns. So countries that were democratizing and the democratization process was broken and they fall back. Right? And those are two different, very different contexts and scenarios and need to be studied separately, we argue. So standalone autocratization, then we have, so here are the top 10 list that you don't want to be on if you're a country, of the ones that have autocratized the most, right? So you have several European countries there, Poland, Greece, and Hungary. And Hungary no longer a democracy. It's an electoral autocracy by now. Same with India. Serbia, of course. But you have a couple of countries on the African continent, 2 island states here, Mauritius and Comoros. And Mauritius in particular is, I think for me, as an old Africanist, I used to study Africa only, right? So, but because it was one of the democratic countries from independence, 1976. And now things are really developing badly in Mauritius. Comoros have had more of ups and downs. So, but then we have these bell turns. So you see countries like South Korea that had a sort of democratization period and an autocratization period. Still a liberal democracy. So it can happen at any level of democracy. The starting points are at very different levels. End points are at very different levels. And they also, some take very long, like El Salvador had an incredibly spread out democratization period starting in 1992, has now been broken and is no longer a democracy by any means. And here you also have countries like Niger with the military coup in Mali, of course, and Burkina, and then Libya. Libya's democratization wasn't that much, of course, but to speak of, they didn't reach very far. But again, you see that only 3 of them remain democracies. 7 have returned to autocracy. So really, and also in these countries, we see elections more and more being under attack. We see that also on indicator level. So this is only autocratizing countries, right? And again, it's government censorship of the media and freedom of academic and cultural expression, and then civil society repression. That is worsening. And there is one pattern here that I wanted to spend a couple of minutes on. The relationship between disinformation, polarization, and autocratization. We see these are 5 countries of the top autocratizers, but it looks like this almost everywhere, right? Indicators of polarization go up, and then democracy goes down. And that polarization has a very close relationship to the increasing spread of disinformation. We looked at that as well. So in countries that are autocratizing, spread of disinformation goes up. In countries that are democratizing, it goes down. And the same with political polarization. We can look at it at country level. Here is the same type of graph. Here is disinformation, and here is polarization. If you're above the line, there's become more of disinformation. Below the line, less. More polarization above the line. You can see how many countries are there and how many of them are red marked. These are autocratizing countries. Right? Oh, sorry. This is what we see in the data, and in numerous analyses now done by us and many others. So, wannabe dictators, they know that disinformation can be spread to increase polarization. Polarization in society between us and them. And then you can start to talk about your political opponents as enemies of who we are, enemies of our way of life, or the kicker, enemies of the nation. Because what do you do with enemies of the nation? Yeah. Because then you can get people support, your supporters, along to start undermining their civil liberties, kill their media outlets, their civil society organizations, and so on, in order to protect the nation. Who doesn't want to protect the nation? Putin started this in the early 2000s, wrote a playbook, then others have been following that. And this is a very dangerous development with the increasing ability also to spread disinformation on the internet using social media and so on. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I would say a few words also about democratizing countries. We have to have some good news, right? There must be something good. And there are some good news, but increasingly less so, right? But nonetheless, they are there. And unfortunately, democratizing countries tend to be very small these days. It's very small countries. It's like the Seychelles, Gambia. It's only 5% of the world population live in these countries. And half of it is Brazil. So you can imagine. But again, there are also different types of democratizers, right? Those that were autocracies for a long time and then start to democratize for whatever reason. And then you have those, the really interesting ones, like Zambia, right? That were autocratizers and managed to turn it around, right? The U-turns. They stand alone. There are only 9 right now in the world, so there's no top 10 list. There are 9. Seychelles is right there on the top. Great, good job in Gambia. And then there are some that, like, Honduras and Fiji, and so, yeah, we'll see where it goes. But at least there's some positive improvements there. We have some U-turns, and here, yes, Zambia, but also Lesotho, right? Had a trouble period and now coming back. And then Benin, a little bit of uptake, and Tunisia, but not very much. And then Brazil is the big player here. Those are really interesting countries, I think, for like getting inspiration and ideas and knowledge about how do you turn an autocratization episode around. Countries like Zambia and Lesotho can be learned from. Anybody from Zambia or Lesotho here? Yeah. Good. Yes. So you can tell them, right? In your discussions later. Yes, she should. Listen to her. We looked at this, and this is actually brand new stuff that just came out. We looked at all autocratization episodes in the world also from 1900 and found that 70% in the last 30 years of autocratization has actually been turned around. So that's the good news, that there is possibility, even with countries that are going down, to turn them around into democracy again. Not all hopes are lost, even if you end up as an electoral autocracy as Zambia was for a few years. Very authoritarian. Yeah, they look like that. And yeah, I'll skip that. Anyway, so those are some of the highlights from this democracy report this year. But then I want to touch a few minutes on what Olav also talked about. So I assume that all of us in this room, we like democracy. Yes, Do we like democracy? Yes. Do you like democracy? You're not sure. Okay. But for its intrinsic values, right? So democracy, express it a little bit different. Democracy is the only political system at the national level that at least seeks to preserve and provide human dignity by the respect of fundamental human rights and democratic rights, and they often overlap. Now, there are people out there questioning democracy a lot. And it was also referenced in the initial panel here that around the world, especially young people, are feeling that democracy is not doing anything for us. It's not delivering. And without denying those feelings and the experiences people have in democracies that do not deliver for people good enough, on average, it's wrong. And I'll show it to you. We did this Case for Democracy report, first with support from the European Commission, thank you very much, and then the Swedish Foreign Ministry, thank you very much. Work over a few years, collating all the best research in the top journals, the most rigorous studies to see what are the effects, are the dividends of democracy. Are autocracies better at something? Or what does science say about this? So here's the thing. Democracies grow much more than autocracies, right? So there are a series of studies now showing this, that democracies do better at growth. And I'm just exemplifying with two very famous studies by Asimoglu and Robinson, with showing basically that 15 years after democratization, countries have 20% higher GDP than they would have had if they didn't democratize. That's a lot. And here's another study showing sort of average growth rate for democracies. The red one is higher than for autocracies, but also that democracies don't have these really bad outcomes, the really terrible economic outcomes. It's a safety net along the lines of Nobel Laureate Amartya Sen, who said famously that democracies never have starvation, big famines. It only occurs in autocracies. So democracies are better at generating growth, but they are not better at lowering economic inequality, and that may be behind some of these feelings that it's not delivering for people. Why this is the case, we don't have the answer, other than maybe bad politicians or something like that. But that's a fact. But they are better at using the growth for things like social protection schemes, like for the poorest and marginalized people. So here's one study I show with a team that if you go from full autocracy to full democracy, spending on social security protection policies, actual spending increased with over 100%. So democracies are better at that as well. They're also better at providing more public goods. So here is, for example, this is internet provision, right? In democracies and autocracies since 2004. They're better at providing safe water. On average, provide to 23% more immunization, more electricity access, and internet access in particular. So democracies are better at delivering also on public goods. One of the problems is that it often takes time. It can take 15, 20 years, and people want something now. That's a real challenge. Democracy often works slow. Right? But they are better at improving also human health. This study, for example, by Bolucci et al. In the Lancet, the top journal in medicine in the world, showing life expectancy increases more in democracies and when countries democratize, they have 20 different outcomes. And on everything, democracies are doing better, even controlling for GDP, right? And that graph illustrates the life expectancy. And this part of the same team have also looked then at these countries we have identified as autocratizing, and then everything goes down, right? So autocratizing countries, yes. Better at improving human health. Also, things like infant mortality. Look at this, right? If you go from full autocracy to full democracy, on average, infant mortality goes down with 94%. Your kids die, that's a serious issue, right? So, in another way of saying it, if you opt for autocracy, you are not likely to end up like Singapore or development like China. Those are outliers. You're much more likely to end up like DRC. Anybody from DRC here? Oh yeah, you, all right. They are also better at providing education. And especially, some studies have looked at this in Africa, and the effect is even stronger than on a global scale. And it's also stronger in poor areas. So that tells you that electoral mechanism, like if you are poor people out in rural areas in Africa, one thing you really want is your kids to have a school to go to and get some education that you didn't get, so you can succeed in life. And so after, if you hold free and fair elections, you will want to have some members of parliament that actually try and get some education for you. And that mechanism seems to be working. And also greater gender equality, that's almost a given, sort of democracy, one man, one vote, well, also women, one person, so it sort of translates in better representation of women and also more policies for gender equality. So that's also very clear. And finally, like Olav was saying, Kant's old theory about the democratic peace has been proven over and over and over again. Democracies do not fight wars with each other. The more democracies we have, the fewer countries that will fight wars with each other. Now, with autocratization, we get more countries that are autocracies, more countries that can fight wars with each other. We can illustrate this also with Russia. Before Putin came into power, Russia was here on this probability graph for engaging in an international armed conflict. 2021 was here. It's not a coincidence that Russia invaded Ukraine, and especially a country then that was seeking to become democratic and would be sort of a demonstration threat to Putin's hold in Russia. As Olav also, sorry, I forgot to. Okay, as Olav also said, it's also with civil war. Democracies have much, much lower incidences of civil war, domestic violent conflict than autocracies. Yes, finally, climate change. The democracies, the evidence is a little bit mixed with different aspects of fighting climate change, adapting to climate change, mitigating climate change. But increasingly, a number of studies show that democracies are doing better. On the Paris Accords, for example, democracies' commitments represent a difference to autocracies in 1.6 degrees globally in climate change. That's a lot. So even with that big threat to your future, our future, all of our future, democracy is also really important. All of this is available for you online on our website. We have some short policy briefs on each of these topics that are meant to be read by sort of regular people, not academics, so you don't need academic training to read them. And summarize and exemplify and give all the sources. There's also a shorter version in this democracy report that's also available online for download. So you can read about it and have the sort of acquire this knowledge yourselves. Everything we do is available on the website. Here's how the website looks like with working papers and all that. And one thing that you can use if you're interested are our graphing tools, because we have 31 million data on democracy that you're free to download, open your statistical software or whatever, and run with it and play around. But if you don't like to do that, you can still access all the data, do the kinds of maps I did, or line graphs, looking at a country, or compare countries, or do regional comparisons. We have special tools for regional comparisons and so on. So you can access and download these graphs, use them whatever way you want. On that note, let me say thank you for listening, and I look forward to meeting you, have a Q&A soon, and also meeting you in the coming days here. Thank you.
So, thank you so much, Staffan. You have been running around quite much here, so please have a sit down here. We are a little bit behind schedule, but that's how it is when we have many things.
I was ahead schedule.
Yeah, you are perfect on time, so overall, you are perfect on time, sorry. So, but I want to say to all of you, a little bit behind schedule, but we have 10 minutes now for a brief Q&A. And Staffan, you will just have to collect a few comments or questions. Okay. So, who will start? Who will be the first one? Yes, and state your name and where you come from.
Okay. And speak up, please.
And keep it brief.
Thanks. So, my name is Taylor Baby. I'm from South Africa. And I would like to know your thoughts on any trends between decolonization and autocratization in Africa. So, as we decolonize and remove political investment from Europe and the global north in Africa, how do we ensure that the democratic principles and values aren't tethered to those colonial days?
So, could we take 3 questions?
Yeah, sure.
Morning, sir. My name is Victoria from Victoria. So I just have a question and pointed to your statement relating to democracies don't go to war. So I'm thinking of it from a perspective of that it is a double-edged sword, wherein we see that in most cases, even in developing countries, democracies prioritize from a standpoint of ensuring political stability, which sometimes can obviously overthrow the emphasis of looking at the socio-economic perspective of it, given the fact that democracies do not solve poverty, don't solve hunger, and in most cases, in relation to the resilience of democracy, people look at it from what is it providing from a socio-economic perspective. Therefore, I just want to say that sometimes that favoring of political stability maintenance does not actually address that battle of inequality. And then my question mainly looks at the fact that in answering what you asked about why it does not solve economic issues or socioeconomic issues, it's mainly because I think we also need to look at the relation between democracies and the thriving culture of corruption through the abuse of democratic institutions, but also taking into account that it is mainly lobbying and civil societies that push forth to that benefit that democracies seem to be providing, like access to healthcare, but governments are actually failing. And even when we look deeper into the quality, the underfunding of educational reform, for instance, and even in stabilizing the access to healthcare in terms of costing. So my question would be then, is democracy a solution or just an antidote to other existing regimes?
Thank you. We have a third question over here.
My name is Ambrose, and I am from Uganda, which is close to DRC. So when you mentioned DRC, yeah. And Edward, you said that we are the leaders of today, and that the leaders of tomorrow are the babies. But you didn't mention who individuals like Staffan are. Being there is because they're supposed to be there. Thank you so much. That was so nice. Now, my question.
Okay, thank you.
Dictators in Africa, in quotes, would often want to say that they do what they do because of the needs of their countries. that, for example, in Rwanda, you need to be tight to be able to tighten things that were loose because of the genocide. So the question is Africa's problem the lack of democracy? Or is Africa's problem, in the context of these countries, so different from democracy? Thank you. Do you get it?
Is the democracy the problem, or
I mean,
leader?
Okay, let's take Rwanda. Would you say that Rwanda's problem in this context is the lack of democracy, or because of our histories, culture, we have other problems, and democracy may not be?
Okay.
Yeah, that's a question. Thank you.
Okay, so decolonization, you're talking about sort of more mental, cultural decolonization ongoing right now, and also sort of economic and so on. So on the economic side, the problem is that if you then rather engage with countries that are not democracies, countries like China, they're not interested in supporting democracy anywhere in the world. To the contrary, they're doing, just like Putin's Russia, doing everything they can to undermine democracy. And human rights are not in their interests, and so on. So strengthening financial ties with those kinds of countries then mean you're getting potentially sort of at least less sort of help with pressure from outside to sustain and develop democracy, and possibly open up for forces that will want to undermine democracy and human rights in your country. So that is a problem. It was very, very obvious with the former Soviet republics in the early 2000s when Putin's meddling and sometimes violent in those to take away whatever democracy they had. Little, wasn't that much, but anyway. And then the second question, it's a big one and a difficult one. I show that democracies are not better at lowering socioeconomic inequality, and that is often a problem. Another aspect of this that I didn't mention is that a lot of these positive effects I talked about here that the science shows democracy have, they typically arrive at higher levels of democracy. It's not a linear relationship. Oh, you get a little bit more democratic, you get a little bit more of whatever, lower infant mortality and so on. It typically comes at high levels of democracy. It's sort of curvilinear. So the effect goes up when you become really democratic. So it's sort of the intuition there is that not only sort of elections must be really free and fair so that votes actually count and you don't have that type of corruption that is vote buying and things, but you also need to have really free and independent media, a really free and independent judicial system that works really well and protects rule of law, and really free and vibrant civil society, not just a little bit of everything. But you need a lot of all of those things for the really positive effects to come. So often the answer is, when people feel that democracy is not delivering, it's not because democracy is at fault, it's because there is not enough democracy in that country. That's at least part of the answer, but it's not the total answer. And it is a big, difficult question. So here in a couple of minutes, I can't go into all the details, but that's one aspect that I think is important to remember. And that also goes for corruption, by the way, right? It's really, really a curvilinear relationship. And finally then, I think, so these days I used to study things like political clientelism and such in Africa. But I haven't done that for the past 15 years. I've only done this sort of stuff here. But yeah, I think I think too little democracy is a big problem. I don't think it's the only problem. A lot of the clientelism, patron-client relationships that to varying degrees in African countries have, not all, but to varying degrees also have cultural, historical roots, is also a problem that undermines good leadership and creates insulated elites that can be insanely corrupt and misbehave and still stay in power. A really good democratic system would in part help with that, not entirely.
So thank you, Staffan. And there are many hands, but I'm sorry that we don't have the time to take the questions here. But Staffan will be around, you know. So just grab him and ask him the questions and take down your questions, because we will discuss whatever kind of provocations that Staffan has brought to your minds. Because now, dear audience, dear everybody, we have a coffee outside here, and we reassemble here at 1:45, so within 15 minutes in the room again for the next part of the program, which is a panel discussion. Thank you, Staffan, and please have the coffee now.
Thank you.
I left 24 copies. We will distribute that. Observation. One question is, when you look at inequality in democracy,
Guys, how am I sounding? Loud and clear. Okay. So I better not say anything anymore until...
I will unmute. I will be...
If they go on,
So,
just cut them short.
welcome everybody back from the coffee break. And now we are continuing our conference with an amazing panel under the big heading, The Future of African Democracies. And this panel will be moderated by Helen Moffat, which is a STIAS fellow. And Helen has graciously accepted this moderating task on a very short notice, because in the program and in the plan, it was intended for Namatai Kwekweza from Zimbabwe to be the moderator. But, dear people, Namatai has been detained, and she's still detained and couldn't be here today. And that's why Helen is doing such a big thing for us and for Namatai, stepping up in her instead of her. So then we have to the right of you, Helen, we have Njoki, Wamai, Njoki,
It's a J.
Sorry. Who is a STIAS?
Gnocchi of, Italian.
Yeah, Njoki.
No,
Jokey.
Well, you are all very welcome, and you are STIAS fellow.
Yes.
And you have been to STIAS several times as a fellow. I think this is the third time you are at STIAS, and you are so welcome to be on the panel. Then we have Nobel Peace Prize laureates from 2011. Do I dare to pronounce your name?
Yes.
Yes.
Tawakkol. Karman.
Yes.
From Yemen.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
And then we have Ursula van Beek.
Very good. Perfect.
Thank you. Who is the founding director of the Center for Research on Democracy at Stellenbosch University. So the premises for this panel is that the three panelists, I have asked them to reflect as a starting address for 10 to 15 minutes on the broad topic, the future of African democracies. And otherwise, the panel is in the hands of Helen. So she will then have a conversation with the panelists, and we will open up by the end for a broader conversation. So, and it may be the case that we will have a message from Namatai in Zimbabwe. We will see what if that is possible. So thank you again, all panelists, for being here, and thank you, Helen, for running the panel. And the floor is all yours now.
Am I live? I am. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Excellent. We've already learned an important protocol. When somebody greets, return the greeting. Well, I'm very honored and surprised to be here. As you know, I've stepped in, and I've got hugely mixed feelings because this is a huge honor. I'm terribly nervous. I'm meeting a Nobel laureate.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
So I've got all that going on, but the reason I'm here is actually a devastating one. And that is that our colleague of Namatai is sitting as we speak in a Zimbabwean jail with no end in sight. I can't think of an event that more forcibly or forcefully prompts us to meditate on the meaning of this panel, the meaning of this symposium. This is a 25-year-old democracy activist who wasn't even in Zimbabwe for the disorderly conduct with which she is charged. And she is also not the only one. She was one of 4 activists hauled off a plane and thrown into jail. She was one of 18 activists arrested that day. Another 70 from another Zimbabwean civil rights organization were arrested that week. This is all coming up to the SADC summit, and which started, I think, on the 17th of August. And we didn't want, or Zimbabwe didn't want, any of that good stuff we were seeing on Steffan's graphs, a civic freedom of expression. So Namatai is not with us, which is devastating. We wish her well. Apparently, she is sending us a message, and it hasn't arrived yet. And when it does, apparently one of our young fellows, I'm going to distinguish between fellows, by which I mean my STIAS fellows, and I'm going to refer to you as young fellows, just so that we don't get muddled. But I believe there's a young fellow from Zimbabwe who has volunteered to read Namatai's message to us. So when that comes in, we will take a break in proceedings and pause. But before we start, I want us to take a minute of silence. If you belong to any kind of faith tradition and you would like to pray for Namatai and her family and her colleagues, you may. If you feel comfortable with the meditative practice of sending her good wishes, warmth, strength, you may do that. If you are comfortable with neither of these options, sit and consider the virtue of gratitude, which is a completely secular virtue. Be grateful that given what you do, you are here now, you are free, you are safe, you are warm. So, let us proceed with a minute of silence for Namatai. Thank you. And now we will proceed with, I hope, a fresh or very sharp appreciation of the freedoms we are all now currently experiencing simply by virtue of being in this room, that we were given the freedom to travel, the papers to travel, that we have been given this wonderful space. We thank STIAS for this opportunity, and that we have this incredible opportunity to meet today's young leaders, as well as enjoy the brilliance of our panel, whom I shall now introduce. In 2011, Tawakkol Karman won the Nobel Peace Prize. She co-shared it with two wonderful women from Liberia, but it's not their day or their story today. At the time, she was the first Arab woman to win the prize, and this isn't anywhere on the websites, but you must be the first Yemeni citizen to have done so.
Of course.
Yeah. She was only the second Muslim woman to do so, and until 2014, she was the youngest. Yeah. So, but researching, especially her foundation, you must go online and you must visit it. I found out that, as I said to her, you're so much more than a Nobel laureate.
Oh, thank you.
She is, she played a prominent role in the Arab Spring, which she calls the Jasmine Revolution, as it played out in Yemen. She established in 2005 the organization Women Journalists Without Chains to promote human rights and protest abuses. And interestingly enough, promote freedom of the press. It's interesting that that's what started you, yes, especially after Staffan's presentation. I hadn't realized there was such a sharp correlation between freedom of expression and media expression and the gains of democracy. So thank you for fighting for those reserves. It is also worth mentioning that you are now a citizen of Turkey.
Yeah.
This is what, you know, in this climate of xenophobia, this is what a refugee looks like. You know, sort of. So that's, I think, an important measure of democracy as well, whether it actually forces its citizens to live beyond its borders. Then, of course, you have the usual string of degrees, and but I do want to draw your attention to two programs that your foundation runs. The one is the wrong set of glasses, Musanada program, which once again the emphasis is on youth empowerment, training in democratic and civil procedures. And then the other thing is that you support something called the Tabibi app, which gives free online medical consultations, which is critical. We have tried to pioneer similar things for the rural parts of South Africa. It means that especially women and children can get free online consultations with volunteer doctors, which markedly improves health care. Yeah. Well, healthcare, but I was thinking indicators, but thank you. You may have to do this quite a bit. Every now and then I think, oh my God, this is where I am, and I freeze. Okay. Ursula von Beek, I got that name right, did I? Yeah, okay. Is the founder and director of the Former Transformation Research Unit and its successor Credo. Have I got all that right? One of your web links is broken, by the way. So I'll speak a little bit about I'll define the Center for Research on Democracy at Stellenbosch University, which is an interdisciplinary academic center, one with strong and deep international links that builds on 25 years of democracy studies. And the disciplines are interdisciplinary, they're all over everything that could possibly support the growth and advent of democracy. And your research interests are I found particularly interesting, that you're interested in history and memory and the impact on democracy, so we want to hear more about that later. And then, of course, I have my beautiful fellow, Njoki.
Yes, maybe.
I did get that right.
No.
Yes. Njoki Wamai, Dr. Njoki Wamai, is an activist, feminist, and assistant professor at the International Relations Department at the Center for Governance and Human Rights at the Political and International Studies Department of the US University in Kenya. Wow, I got to the end of that, and I didn't.
Well done.
I didn't mess it up too much. She once again has a stellar academic record, but the important things that she wanted me to stress was that I told you that she was a scholar activist, we both are, and a feminist, we both are, and an advocate and a student of democracy rights, and especially with regard to transitions. And she is also somebody who leads the establishment of centers for Black and African excellence. And she has set those up in some spaces that I think you must have found very hostile at first, or nothing seems to deter you. She just carries on trucking. So I will now hand over to my fellow panelists, and we're going to start with our Nobel laureate. No surprises there. Speak to the theme of the future of democracy in Africa for about 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, I am so happy to be in South Africa. I feel myself belong to this great country as my country, and also it's the country of my source of inspiration, Nelson Mandela. I taught a lot from him, and since I started my activism on defending on human rights and expression rights, the first thing that I put is the photo of Nelson Mandela. So thanks to you people in South Africa to give us this a very big model of peaceful struggle for freedom. So talking about democracy, and I like also to start when we talk about the future of African democracies, to start with the same theme of the previous panel, what is that the democracy itself around the world is suffering. Regardless, is it in the superpower democratic countries or the emerging democratic countries, or the countries that really people inside these countries are suffering from authoritarian regimes and really struggling for democracy. So democracy in general are really under a great threat and a great danger and a great decline. So we are in an era that we are really afraid about democracy in the United States, for example. So what is the destiny of democracy in the United States if conservatives of the right-wing or Trump or win the election.
God forbid.
And I'm talking about Trumpism, about the hate, about the decline of democracy, about the dividing the society inside the United States and dividing the world and many things. So, and the same thing is happening in Europe, in Western countries, the same thing. There is a very, very big, decline in democracy there. And you see in Africa, in Middle East, so all of us, all the people around the world has a real responsibility to defend on democracy. This is our very big and very first responsibility, to defend democracy. And when I'm talking about people who should defend democracy, I'm talking about especially youth people like you, young people like you, because democracy is your destiny and is your children's destiny. And without creating this destiny, that means that we make this world bad place, and that we betrayed the values and principles that we people dream for. And democracy, we should consider democracy as something belong to us, especially people in Africa, especially people in Middle East. It is not a matter imported from Western countries. No, it is not something created by Western countries. No, our heritage started with democracy, especially here in Africa, and you should remember this. African people should remember this. And now the backlash between sovereignty and democracy should stop, should end, because there is no conflict between sovereignty and democracy. Sovereignty and democracy is the two faces of one coin, which is freedom, which is dignity, which is good governance, which is welfare and prosperity. So now the coups that are happening now in Africa under the pretext of saving the sovereignty is a lie by the new authoritarian movements, coups, and regimes. They want just to encourage people in Africa, okay, let's fight for sovereignty, let's defend our sovereignty. We are against the colonial power, which is something true. Without the colonial powers and their interfering in African matters, the coups will not happen. Because their bad practices through their period of ruling African countries, our countries, and after the independence, they continued their process and their procedures in interfering of our countries, in supporting dictators in our countries, in stealing the wealth of people. So though, yes, that is true. That is true that colonial powers supported dictatorship and didn't support democracy. The only thing that they support is their interest. And because of that, they supported that parties or that dictator also just for the sake of their interests, not for the sake of their values that they claim of protecting democracy, of supporting democracy. No, they just want their interest. Because of that, Africa until now suffer from poverty, from conflicts, from wars, from corruption. So yes, that's true. This is very important, analysis of the root problems of the African democracy or current situation. But at the same time, it is not the solution that the military coup is the solution. Creating another dictatorship, creating another autocracy. No, that is not African people. Well, that is not African people dream. That is not African people democracy. And when anyone said that we import democracy from West, tell them stop. We have a very huge and strong heritage with democracy. For example, under the Mali Empire, you have the first human rights declaration. Under the Queen of Sheba, Bilqis, I came from Yemen. Queen of Sheba ruled many of African countries such as Ethiopia. Thousands of years ago, and this queen ruled our countries by democracy. It is not word of democracy. I don't know what is the word before that. But it is the process, which is the right of people to choose their rulers and the right of people to participate in decision. So you have that. And you don't have that, you shouldn't lead, that hate between nations, between civilization. No. We welcome the cultural. We welcome our, Western, universities, people, policy, if it will serve our interests. So the future of Africa, yes. You in Africa has a lot of challenges, a lot of coup, a lot of wars, a lot of conflicts, a lot of poverty, a lot of problems. But at the same time, you have the superpower, which is the new generation. That is increasing every day. And they said, I read some reports that during the coming 15 years, the population of Africa will double. So that is the biggest wealth and the biggest source of solution. And you are the solution. And believe me, when I'm talking to you about you as a solution, I mean it. Because I was young and I was the solution. When I led my country against the dictator in my country, in Arab Spring revolutions. When I convinced my people who own more than 70 million pieces of weapons to stop using that weapons, to leave them in their houses or tribes and come with me with flowers, with chants, only chants and flowers in all the face of violence and atrocities practiced by the dictator of Yemen. I didn't see myself weak. I didn't see myself that I don't have any power. No. I believed on myself. And I believed on youth like you, young people like you. I convinced them to be with me. Went to the street with me. Go to the universities, convinced your students to be with me against this dictator. And still, I am with these young people against wars in Yemen, against militia coup in Yemen, against wars in other countries in our region and around the world. So again, yes, the challenge is big, but also the hope is bigger. because you are the one who handle it. You are the one who created. If you think that those people who make the coup will win, you betrayed your country, yourself, and the future of Africa. If you see that that is just a temporary event, and you are the one who will handle it, gather people, you will solve this thing. Last thing is, I want to speak with the doctor, with the professor, and I like his lecture very, very much. But I have just one note about Tunisia. Tunisia is I like also the types, and I learned a lot, but Tunisia is a type of electoral autocracy. It's no longer, that we consider it as any country that close to democracy, electoral democracy or liberal, no. Under the rule of the President Qais bin Said, who elected to be as a president, but he totally dismissed and shut off all the constitutional institutions. He dismissed the government, he stopped the parliament, he stopped the constitution, he arrested most of his opponent, journalists, etc., etc. And I agree with him that it is not the matter of that the problem is with democracy. No, the problem, because if this is not the true democracy, the problem is not with the problem is the lack of democracy. Is that this is the not true democracy, it's the short democracy. So we have to struggle for a true democracy that will lead to the great good governance. The great good governance means fair and free election, means transparency, means accountability, means access to information, means women's rights, kids' rights, etc., etc. And this is what you young people will achieve in Africa, and we people will achieve in Arab countries, and people around the world also will achieve it. The future of the world will be with democracy, with freedom, with dignity of people, as long as we people believe that we one who will create it and achieve it. And this is our promise to us and to the coming future and to the coming generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was inspiring. And that's a tough act to follow.
Yeah.
But Njoki, I know you're up for it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much again. And now over to you.
Thank you. So thank you so much, Tawakkol, for that very inspiring. And now it's very clear why you were selected along with our African sisters, Lima Bowie and the president of Liberia. So my name is Njoki Wamai, and in my language, Gikoyo, the J is J. It does not become Y, like in Europe, you know? So the J remains a J. And so I am an Isolomzo fellow. So I think it's, which really resonates with what the young people we have here, which means the eye of tomorrow. I will not pronounce Sikosa. Sorry for massacring Kosa. But it means, I know, it means the eye of tomorrow, right? Yeah?
No.
Yeah. So, and that's exactly what you are. And not just the eye of tomorrow, even today, as many of you here, and also an assistant professor in politics and international studies. I think the introductions have been done. But one of the things also that I was very excited that Christophe asked me to be part of this is because also I was a student leader at the University of Nairobi, when that's like 16 years ago. And beyond also being a student leader, I was a youth activist. And one of the things we did as youth activists then, we wrote the national youth policy in Kenya. There was no youth policy. And I was also part of the first National Youth Council steering committee that was writing now the National Youth Policy, which now formed what we have as a National Youth Council. And also another thing we did, we participated in writing the African Youth Policy. I was like, I sound like a grandmother, but it was like 16 years ago, actually interestingly funded by the one and only Muammar Gaddafi. So we went to Libya to write the African Youth Policy, and also in Addis. So, but I think, so for me, I'm always very excited to be part of youth gatherings, because I can look at the past, the things we dreamt about when we were writing all these policies for African youth, and where we are, and hopefully where we are going. And as you've heard from the very, very good statistics we had Professor Lindberg, Staffan, democracy is like we're in doom right now, but there's hope, seeing all of you so excited, you know. And so we are at a very challenging place, and I really, really love that he has been doing this for so long, and that there's statistics to show that democracy is in decline, because we're talking about what's the future of African democracy. And many people have talked about that. Right here, I think in Cape Town, you know about, I don't know whether you've heard of Afrobarometer, another center like what Staffan has. And one of the things also they have commented is saying democratic governance in Africa is facing severe headwinds, particularly at the level of supply. There's somebody there called Jima Bodi, the person who heads it. So we are at a difficult place. And also, another group that also does the same statistics, the Freedom House, has said that we are in the 18th year of decline, according to Freedom House, the last report for 2024. And it also shows political rights and civil liberties were undermined in 52 countries, affecting 1/5 of the world's population. So only 21. I will not go a lot into that because I think we had a very, very good presentation. But African democracy is at risk. People have called it democratic winter. Very long, very cold, darkness. Let us wait for the spring. I don't know when the spring is coming, but I hope that's what we are trying to do here. How do we get to the spring faster, right? And how can we as youth be agents of getting there? And I have, I don't know whether it's showing us a slide with an African map there that really shows where we seem to be. Again, you saw that we are doing really badly. Southern Africa, many of you are from Southern Africa. There's an African map that I wanted to show. So in Southern Africa, there is at least hope. There's a lot of hope, even according to the last Freedom House report. Yeah, you can see there's a lot of hope because that's where we seem to be free. And as you heard even from Staffan, we've still not achieved a liberal democracy, right? It's still an electoral democracy. We are still, and other countries, of course, are even doing worse, whether it's like Kenya, like Kenya. You've seen what's going on in Kenya, so there are I have lots of pictures also of Kenyan youth to pay homage to the work they've done, generations, we are calling them Gen Z. I wish I was, yeah, but during my time, we were called .com. So I'm also a very proud .com, because we were the first people to use computers as teens. So we were called the .com generation. And everybody would say, don't mind those .coms. Now I'm an old millennial. So, but the Gen Z, which most of you are here, is really that generation between Gen Z is up to 27, is it 27? Up to 27 right now, or 29? From, I think, 18 to 29 right now. But it's Gen Z, and that's what we're talking to. And also a part of millennials, younger millennials, not an old millennial like me. And who are really, really steering part of the activism we are seeing in Kenya. And so, but you can see the Freedom House statistics, very, very few African countries, and I don't want to belabor this because I just think we had an absolutely very great statistics from Staffan earlier, but you can see we are really doing badly on the continent. You know, you can look at your country. Southern Africa, as I said, at least you're doing better than everybody else. Only the Mauritius down there, the small islands, as he said, that are in the 90s, that probably have achieved liberal democracy. And so you can see the work you have is a lot. What is the future now that we're in this doom? The beauty is that there's a lot of support across countries for democracy. We still, as much as I know some of you are feeling like, oh my God, democracy, what does it do? It's true, it breeds all those bad, there are so many challenges with democracy, but I think on a scale, it's still, the benefits outweigh, the pros outweigh the cons, and you've seen that even in terms of development gains, right? Whether it's all those challenges. But also, somebody would say it's true, because we are looking at like 3 broad political systems: democracies, authoritarian systems, and totalitarian systems. Actually, some of these totalitarian systems, however horrible they are able to like give healthcare, for instance, to everybody, you know, or authoritarian systems, healthcare, what we call the socio-economic rights, they seem to do quite well because everything is maybe centralized and it's the state providing, compared to democracies. But of course, the statistics, if you look at on general, democracy still seem to do better, but all those challenges are there. So another thing of this future of our democracies, one of the things you realize with that, there's another map here I want to show. The youth demographic dividend is one of the good thing about, there's another African map, yes, the youth demographic dividend. These median ages are not, they are not for last year. I was trying to get for the very reason. So they are a bit dated, maybe about 7 years from, but still, I was looking at some of them, like South Africa is now 28 point something, 3. Kenya, 19.1 is now at 19.7. These are the median ages. So what people keep saying, Africa is a very young continent, is very, very true. Right? So these are the average ages of the country. The most people, if you look at like a graph that is South Africa, you'll see most people are within, you know, the younger ages. If you look at, say, a population demographic map for, say, Sweden, you'll be very surprised. It's usually an inverted cone. Why? Because there are very few young people and then so many old people, and now they have their own crisis, of course, of how do we support all these old people, because, you know, a lot of healthcare and pension and that kind of thing. And then for us, it's the other way. It's a real, it's like a triangle. And this is even more even. If you looked at countries like Kenya, Uganda, it's a real triangle. So many young people with very few old people. And so we have, in a way, a crisis and also a huge potential for great things. You know, that's what they call the youth bulge. Could be a curse or a blessing. And how do we make it a blessing? And those are the challenges as youth. You need to start questioning your governments, right? Because the next even 50 years, Africans will be the highest population in the world. Chinese will have reduced. Even Indians will be on the decline. So Africans will be like, you know, the Chinese today will be 2 billion or whatever. So, but are we ready for that huge youth population? You know, are there jobs? is there investment? And that's why everybody right now is running helter-skelter, like, what do we do with these youth? But the beauty of also, many of these youth have realized their value. That's what I'm saying, it's like a youth, there's a tech, it's like a huge good nexus of a youth bulge and a tech and also technology coming together. Many of you are all linked to the world and you can see what's going on. We deserve better. And so you're challenging, that's where there's increased challenging of holding account of states for a liberal democracy. We want freedoms, we want the same things that people are enjoying in the world. That's what African youth and Africans deserve. Most of them, of course, will always say no. The politicians and dictators will always say Africa is different. Of course, we are different. We deserve. And the thing about, and I like what Tawakkol was saying, we have been, actually, if you look at Mali, and it's not Mali, the current Mali, the Kingdom of Mali. I hope you know the Mali Empire, the Songhai Empire, the empires that were there before the horrible conference in Berlin that happened in October. In the October of 1884 to March 1885. These were empires, there were polities, Songhai Empire, Mali Empire. Ghana was an empire. It was not that country here. It was actually further north. And all this, not further north, further to like where Sierra Leone and other countries are. And all these countries, if you read the general history of Africa, there's a scholar called Kizerbo from Burkina Faso. He's written about it, you can read about it. Yeah, Kizerbo in the general history of Africa, and those are volumes. By the way, if you want to understand your past, go and read them. I'm sure they're in the Stellenbosch library. The general history of Africa. There are 10 volumes or 8 of and it was history written by Africans, and they're UNESCO books actually. So it's there about the different and the complexity of those democratic systems that existed. If you look at even many of your languages, what are those words? And those are some of the things you need to start doing. How did you, in your communities, whether it's there in Xhosa, Zulu, Tsonga, what were our traditional systems, right? Political systems. What were our political theories and political ideals? Beyond Ubuntu, which is, the one that everybody has, we have Utu in Kiswahili. So all those, what were your political systems? What were their names? Write about them. Don't just, as much as you're writing about Western liberal democracy, when you're doing your essays, write about your lives, write about your people, even in school, right? Because and I teach international relations. Many of you are in IR, in politics, in engineering. Write about your people. Go back to your knowledges, because that idea of thinking that we do not have knowledge is very problematic. And that's why we start saying democracy is not ours, it's a Western thing. Because you don't actually go and research about your own democracies. Document it. Write a journal article about it, right? Yes. So that's the only way people will start saying, according to this Luba in Zambia, this was what democracy was called. This is how they did it. This was, analyze it, right? Yeah. So that's part of the problem, is the problems of knowledge, what do you call it? Politics of knowledge and knowledge production. So we also need to decolonize. As much as we are decolonizing, I mean, we cannot say that we have to do the work also of bringing those knowledges to the fore, to the academy, to the discussions, to everywhere, right? And so going back to these futures of this African democracy, there is hope now that our population is so young. How this is managed could be a crisis, and already you can see there are many crises, like in Kenya, how this person who is the president is managing, the embattled president as we call him, you know, the embattled president. How he's managing the whole thing is so wrong. And it's really a case of youth who are youth bulge, liberal ideals, who believe, and also Kenya, we are very vast in technology. Almost everybody, young person we are very techy. You know our legendary fights on Twitter. I think we always win. We have to agree on the continent. We are the winners of all tech hashtags and that kind of thing. Or on TikTok. You try and fight a Kenyan. Everybody will be on your case. So anyway, so technology presents a huge opportunity also for holding states to account. Part of the reason this Ruto in Kenya, after people invaded the parliament, not even that, part of the reason we rejected, it was all tech. It was a hashtag, reject finance bill, and he had to reject it. And now everything we do is hashtag Ruto must go. And you can keep helping us. Anyway, so so technology, see the power of technology. It started, and all these Ruto must go, reject, started on, whatever you saw on the media started on X and on TikTok. So, and of course now even older people, parents are now saying, okay, you people seem to know what you're doing, tell us and we will follow you. So you can see your power. And so just going to, many youth movements have emerged. See your youth movements as part of a greater picture. There's also a scholar called Brogdart and Brogdart. They've talked about they've classified youth movements. And one is student movements, like, you know, your roads must fall, fees must fall. Now we currently have fees must fall, Kenya also. But you can see what your fees must fall movement did here in South Africa, and well done to many of you. Cultural youth movements, they could be literary, artistic, musical, and sometimes they kind of can span across. Some musical ones, like in Senegal, Yen Mare became a political movement. I hope you've heard of Yen Mare, have you? Guys, and you're in the youth. So that's one thing. I know in South Africa, it's very easy to be very, you know, to forget about what's going on in the rest of Africa. Please don't do that. Because the rest of Africa knows what you do, and you inspire them. So you must not practice South African exceptionalism, because that's a huge problem here. You always have to, if you're really Pan-African, you should be bothered and give solidarity to those struggles elsewhere. And of course, Black Lives Matter, ethnic movements, queer, and you know the very many queer movements that have arisen, and even on the continent, religious, countercultural movements. Some of you, I'm sure, here were part of the 60s or 70s hippie culture. Those were youth movements at that time. I mean, so peace and anti-war movements, and you know there are so many depending on which side you support, Ukraine, DRC, bring back the girls in Nigeria. You know there was somebody from Nigeria. And of course, Free Palestine, right? and so there are all those peace and anti-war movements. And then there are political movements, and they span a long time. You've heard of the Young Turks, right? And what they did those many years. And Firimbi, somebody's from DRC, Operation Firimbi, Lucha, and in Kenya there's a Gen Z. It's called the Gen Z movement. You know, the Generation Z. Environmental movements, many of you are in environmental courses. Hashtag divest, yeah? Some of you are in the divest movement. Others on ISO side. So coming to an end, what are those drivers you need to actually improve these democracies as youth? Remember, you have the biggest stake, because, and especially as African youth, you're going to be the highest population in the world, you know, in the next 20, even now you're already the highest population on the continent. So you're the people who are going to be running the show in the next, you are still running the show, but you'll be the future is yours. Even me, I might be there, but you're the main, you know? So it's your stake. You have to really invest in this future, right? And so liberal democracies or good democracies, you're the people who harvest that dividend. You know, you earn most from it. And so how do we do this? It's holding accountability. And we've seen that, strengthening institutions that respect, whether it's the rule of law, judiciaries, parliament, democracies. How do you strengthen that? first of all, a good constitution. And I'm glad, like in South Africa, there's a very good constitution. We have a good constitution, but it's always been messed up. So it's also, as much as you have a good constitution, you have to really hold them to account. And it's not enough to say, oh no, you know, I mean, environment issues. They do not. You have to start seeing your connection between the environment and politics, right? Everything is related to politics. One of the courses I love teaching absolutely is undergraduate introduction to politics, because everything in your life is linked to politics. So don't say, oh, you know, I'm this, I'm an engineer, I'm in AI. No, it's linked to politics. So you have to start connecting your struggles to politics. So strengthening institutions, creating political cultures of tolerance for difference. You know, this idea of those are us, them versus us, whether it's ethnicity, LGBTQ, whatever, we have to stop creating difference, or white, black, whatever, create cultures of tolerance for difference. And people also have to meet in that space and have that difficult conversation. Because many people don't want to have the conversation, even here, on race or whatever. So political institutions and systems that ensure exercise of power with restraint and sharing of power. And I could go into that, but I'll not go into that. Proportional representation systems, you know, parliamentary systems have been seen to be more better in restraint of power. Free media, you know, ensuring there's free media. Strong political parties, which you have to make sure also, whether it's by getting into politics sometimes or getting into those places. And of course, a robust civil society, and including a robust youth within civil society. Most of your organizations or what you do is linked to civil society. And so, I mean, if you do some of those things, we have to remain resilient. So it's a long journey. That's all I can say as I end. It's a very long journey. And and remember, you're the greatest, you're the people who earn the most dividend. So don't get tired, just keep on and be resilient. Like, I just want to show one last image of some Kenyan youth. It's a bit sad, but the last image of young people holding a flag during this protest. The next one, yeah, it's a very, very sad picture. But this is really the picture that has come to define Gen Z, what happened. And that person lying there is David Shege, shot by the police. He was a computer scientist. He was coming out to protest. Of course, they're holding the state to account. And these young men, even after David Shege was shot, dead, his brains were spilled out. This is right outside Parliament, the day people invaded Parliament, if you saw. These young men the police kept shooting blanks and what are they called? Tear gas. They would jump, come back and still hold the flag over his body. What level of resilience, what level of hope in that flag and the Kenyan Constitution? And I end at that, but please remove the bad picture. That's David Shege, and you can put the last picture on, the last picture on democracy. The last one is a yellow one. So if we don't keep holding account, you can see it's very easy to triple to autocracy, and I end at that.
Thank you very much. You packed in a lot for us to think about. And now over to you, Ursula.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me to this gathering. A couple of things have already been said, but I would like to start by saying that Albert Einstein has once said that the true sign of intelligence is not knowledge, but imagination. And what does really mean is that intelligence is the ability for you to see what is, and imagination is the ability for you to see what could be. And I think that we are gathered here today to discuss what could be the future of this continent. Because as we know very well, as has been very well presented by the V-Dem director, democracy is in trouble everywhere. Africa is not an exception. But having said that, I have to add that Africa, the African democratic project is actually facing its most challenging times. Just to give you an idea, is in mere 4 years, between 2020 and 2023, 7 countries have had a change of regime through military coups. But the concern is that the autocratic wave, which this represents, is going beyond the coup belt. And according to V-Dem, but also according to Afrobarometer data, we have now discovered that the citizens' rating of the democracy in their own country has dropped by 3 percentage points in 32 countries between 2014 and 2023. And what is perhaps even more concerning is that in between all these countries, 32, that includes Botswana and Mauritius. And these 2 countries have been always shown to be the sort of flagships of this continent because of the high quality of democracy. So we hear a signal, a danger signal ringing because of these trends. Well, it is not very difficult to say why that is the case. Simply put, Africans are fed up with the shaft that passes for democracy. I mean, they are upset about the governments that are unaccountable, corrupt, can't deliver the goods, cannot assure safety of their citizens. And I mean, could anybody blame people for wanting something else, for wanting a change? So especially if populations are not particularly aware of the goodness of democracy, which is taken away through simply not getting what democracy promises to give. So the bottom line here is that to survive, democracy everywhere and on this continent as well has to deliver the goods. If it doesn't, you know, we can talk about democracy and be very enthusiastic about it, but democracy must deliver the goods. Now let us imagine how could this possibly achieved? And I think there are possibly many ways in which to do it, but there are 2 factors that promise for the nearer future that things could actually change for the better. And the first is that this continent is richly endowed with natural resources. I mean, truly. And secondly, like it has been mentioned by Njoki already, there is so Africa will have doubled its population in the next 30 years. And as you said, that will bring the demographic dividend, right? And demographic dividend means that people who are between 15 and 64 years of age outnumber those who are retired or who haven't reached maturity yet. And however, the dividend will only happen if the conditions are right. Okay? Yeah. So that depends on how what policies are put in place, and it depends also at an extremely high level on the input into education and skill development. Now, national African governments are vested with this responsibility to actually deliver on this front. Unfortunately, and that is a very big problem, the African governments, instead of increasing public spending on education and skill development, cannot do that. Why? Because they are extremely indebted. There's a sovereign debt that actually makes progress on this continent really hard, despite good intentions. But I don't want to be all negative. I just wanted to actually give you some idea about the indebtedness, and that is Africa's debt in 2022 alone was the size of the global GDP that year. And it has doubled between 2010 and 2022. And these levels are, according to United Nations, are predicted to stay for this year and also next year. But there are two opportunities on the horizon that I hope, and we all should hope, could change the situation. Namely, there are two upcoming gatherings, global gatherings, which are supposed to discuss a different approach towards the future, so as to break this vicious cycle of debt. And the first one is the United Nations will preside over a summit of the future, the first such gathering that will bring stakeholders from heads of government to civil society representatives, in other words, a very broad number of representatives. And the idea is to formulate a pact for the future that would advance the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 and would lead to it would create an international system that can better meet the needs of current and future generations. And in June 2025, the United Nations will run the 4th International Conference on Financing and Development, which will take place in Spain. This too is aimed at advancing new policies particularly for the financial long-term spending. And the priority is to replace the international financial system, which is outdated, dysfunctional, and doesn't really serve any purpose at all. If that were to be successful, then public development banks would be the ones to take over and set trade and investment rules that would secure financial safety net at the national and global levels. The two forums present an opportunity for African debt restructuring or maybe debt forgiveness. But for this to happen, Africa will have to really aggressively advocate. There is no such thing as, oh yes, you are poor, we are rich, we're going to give it to you. That does not happen. That's what life is all about in private and on the global level. So to be taken seriously, the African representatives or negotiators who will be present at these fora will have to commit unequivocally to making transparent both the process for incurring new debts and the terms of all public debt transactions. They should also agree to being held accountable and to making sure that their citizens understand what their governments have undertaken on their behalf. The main argument to be presented by African representatives should be that exclusive focus on finance with restructuring of the debt is not the way to go forward. That doesn't work, hasn't worked yet. So what today's world needs is a grand strategy through prudent economic policy that takes into account the demands of domestic politics, but in the wider global context. The core of the argument in favor of a different approach is that servicing debt obligations cuts down on spending on development, which is obvious, and therefore both creditors and debtors should agree that debt negotiations should not focus solely on finance, but should also incorporate economic, social, human rights issues, as well as governance dimensions that are seen in a more global environment. In this, if that was the approach to dealing with the debt crisis, then money could be spent in a different way. And now Africa's trump card is the abundance of natural resources, in particular gas, metals, rare metals, and rare minerals, which are essential for low carbon transition. This is in addition to the huge amount of solar power, wind power, and therefore, if the rules were changed and Africa were able to move towards a low carbon transition, this would not only be a major developmental way forward for the continent, but it would also help curb global climate change, global fight against climate change. Thank you very much.
Right. Now, the brief I was given was that the panelists would have a chance to engage and speak with each other, which would be wonderful. But it may not be practical because my other brief is, please try and wrap this up by 12:20. And I want to give as many people here the opportunity to ask a question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something both very autocratic and democratic. I'm going to, because there are 24 young fellows here, and it would be wonderful if you all felt free to ask a question, but you get to ask one question. We don't want to hear, and my second question is, you may ask a second or a third question, but then you go to the end of the line, you go back again. And the other thing is that I think we should save this for a time when we're a parallel universe where we're less time stressed. This is not so much of a question as a comment. Insert long speech. Maybe if we are a bit more relaxed and we're in our transport arrangements and you're going to your next events, we can have more of that. But I am aware of the fact that there are transport logistics, you have appointments elsewhere, that you are so pushed for time you have to eat a packed lunch in the transport on the way to your next event. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the democratic thing I'm going to do is that the three of you are completely entitled to ask questions.
Thank you. Yeah, let them ask.
But if you want to chime in as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take questions in sets of 3. And just for starters, in terms of gender equity, do I have 3 women who have questions? 1, 2, 3. You'll have to go in the next round. Now, men, so first, you're third, you're, no, first, third, fifth. Gentlemen, raise your hands. 2, 4, 6. Okay, who is number 1? Right. Oh, I forgot the most obvious of all. Stand up, wait for the mic, say your name and where you're from, please.
All right, afternoon. My name is Hope Dlamini from Pretoria. So my question is addressed to our Nobel Peace Laureate. Ma'am, so taking into consideration Fukuyama's notion that peace is a byproduct of war, that democratization came as a result of conflict throughout the world, for instance, with the World War. Do you think that the ideological evolution of democracy as an aspiration for Africans has reached its endpoint? And do you honestly believe that coups that you said are disingenuous as a democratic action are not a new era of also fighting for the very same democracy, given that it is a byproduct of war? Thank you.
Okay, who was number 2? Okay. We're going to take sets of 3.
Right, thank you very much. So my name is Ishmael from South Africa. My question is for Njoki. So the role of indigenous storytelling in keeping African stories alive is very important. These stories are an opponent to Western understandings of Africa, its people, its history, and its identity. How and what would you say is the truth of the African child's democracy?
Okay, good question. Number 3. Mm-hmm. Who was 3? I think it was you. There she is.
Hello, my name is Joy from Nigeria. This is a question I actually posed to Prof. Staffan, but I just want to pose it to Njoki, sorry. So from a West African's perspective, one of the biggest threats to Africa, African democracy post-colonialism is tribalism, right? So a lot of people don't really look at policies or of their choices or the person they choose, they just look, oh, he's in the same tribe as I am, or he stands, like, you know, it's a very big problem in Africa, at least in West Africa, I know in East Africa as well. So how do you actually, what do you suggest to like fix this problem? Because it's not a problem that I think a lot of the rest of the world, especially the Western side, kind of face. Like, so Africans, like, how can we fix this problem? Like, stop looking at the tribe of the person and actually look at what they stand for. So, yeah.
Well, I think it's mostly you, but I think the others can also jump in.
Let's start with Njoki.
No, you're the big fish. No, but that's a very, very, very good question. I'll start with the easier one. Storytelling. I love, and I know you're a writer, you love writing. I think, yes, we need to tell our own stories. So like the work you do in writing stories, we need to write our own stories. And it's through writing your own stories that, and hope, there was someone who said they do child podcasts. Hopefully those stories can be read in podcasts for children, because it's the only way children can have a template. African children can have a template. Unlike us, I keep saying when I was young, we used to, nursery school rhymes were London's burning. We had never seen London, you know, or A for apple. And we were not eating apples in Kenya till South Africans started importing them. You know, so you can see the crisis. So instead of eating our own, for our own things, like arrowroots, we were busy talking about things. So it's very, very important because it forms children's also imagination based on their realities. It's very important. And also, even at undergraduate level, one of the things I keep advocating for, we need to start teaching African politics and African political philosophy, you know, for everybody, and it should be almost a compulsory course. Of course, with other social philosophies, we all study Ubuntu, we know about it, there are all these Ubuntu chairs, but what is our African political philosophies that already existed? So I hope we can learn. So I agree, but stories would be so important even for people to write about them. Yes, I agree. I hate to call it tribalism, but I agree there is a serious problem of ethnicity. But it's not unique to us, you know? It's just that other countries have managed it better. Like, I used to live in the UK, so the UK has serious problems of, if we were to call the Scots a tribe, you know, who are, for instance, saying they also want to exit and leave the whole United Kingdom. So it is not unique to us, it's just that other countries have managed it better. And how to manage it, I think one of the things, of course, is some of the things we are saying, sharing the resources equally or proportionately to the population. And one of the things post-independence did so wrongly, they used their huge ethnic group. So like me, I'm Kikuyu in Kenya, the Kikuyus got a huge share of the cake. If it's in Ghana, there are Khans. Even the language was made like it's a national language, which is terrible. And there's a scholar called Francis Stewart who talks about how that now creates horizontal inequalities. And horizontal inequalities are inequalities across groups. And that's why when there's horizontal inequalities, people will definitely, there'll be conflict as opposed to, say, vertical inequality. You don't fight the rich people in your street. Okay, they're not in your street. In the other side of the, right? You don't wake up and go fight them because it's not a group. But once you're discriminated across groups, of course, horizontal inequalities, this is likely to happen. So we need to invest and make sure all these equalization funds are there for all groups. And also national conversations. And one of the things I'm very proud about Gen Z movement in Kenya, they are saying we are tribeless, we are everything less, you know. Tribeless, partyless, because that's how politicians also used to organize. Because of course, once you use that, you know, like what has happened here in South Africa, MK, you know, a Zulu party. I know you know what has gone on. But politicians love that. So the more you become more divided along those fissures, the better for them. Yeah. But we can talk more.
And the first question?
Okay. Look, democracy isn't the result of war. It is the solution for wars and conflicts. So, because of that, after the Second War, World War, the European countries, the Western countries, decided to go to democracy as a result, not a result, as a solution. Because of that, we, people who sacrifice and struggle for freedom and dignity, we choose a democracy as a mechanism to rule our countries, not replacing this regime with other autocracy or other dictators' regime. So the democracy itself is a solution. The problem is how we define the democracy. Is it only the right of people to vote, which is very important, which is the icon, which is the corner of democracy, is the will of people to choose their rulers? That's right. But also there is another important keys of democracy. So when we talk about democracy, it is the right of people to choose their government, but it's at the same time the right of people to hold their governments accountable. It's the right of people to access to every basic rights, like education, like healthcare, like etc., etc. It's the expression rights. It's the sources, equal distribution of sources to every citizen in the country. It's the equality, it's freedom, it's respect, it's coexistence. So this is the whole mechanism that we all should preserve and defend and protect. And this is our meaning, and this is the democracy that we are working for and struggle for. And because of that, we should reject any kind of interference in our affairs from those countries that doesn't really respect the real democracy. From those countries that just want their interests, not the values of democracy and equality and prosperity. Whether they are democratic country or autocrat countries. So we should reject the interfering of China and Russia. China and Russia isn't the solution of our problems. They are not the countries that will give us prosperity, that will give us education, that will give us, healthcare. No. Look, if there is a real democracy, Putin wouldn't be there to occupy Ukraine. If there is a real democracy in the Western countries, or respect democracy, because Western countries, unfortunately, and I'm talking about governments, I'm not talking about people's, NGOs, medias, I'm talking about policy. If there are real respect to democracy, they wouldn't support directly or indirectly the dictator of Syria, Bashar al-Assad. Because they supported Bashar al-Assad by their silence in front of all his genocide and increasing, crimes against Syrian people, they destroyed Syria, they destroyed Arab Spring, and they encouraged Putin to invade Russia, to invade Ukraine. So we have to define democracy as the real meaning of a true democracy. And we have to struggle for this democracy. I know that here there's a 25 chosen youth, African, young people from around Africa came to this event. I'm asking you, are you ready to defend on democracy? If you are not ready, why are you here? Why are you here? Are you brave enough, courageous enough to defend on your heritage? It is not something coming from outside. You have to be proud of African heritage and African, even current. Do you know that you belong to countries that you have more than 10,000 of language? So don't just see to the chaos, wars. No, to see to the people who are really can live with each other, with their multicultural and multi-diverse language and religions. Yes, there is problems, but there is a great people. We have a good symbol, models like what happened in Senegal, for example. Rwanda, for example. So few people across the genocide, wars, hatred, division, everything. But you are in the process. In the process. And again, and this is what I'm talking about. So when they told Arab Spring failed. No, it didn't fail. We're still in the process. We're still in the process. Arab Spring was in 2011, and we are now just in 2024. 14 years, 14 years. Just 14 years, we are still sacrificing, struggling, for our freedom and democracy. And through this 14 years, we pushed more than 7 dictators to resign and to leave. And this is a victory. And you have the same victory. So again, don't allow China, don't allow Russia, don't allow those foreigners, peoples, to decide your destiny. Listen to them, to the good people, and work with them, a good partnership. Good, but for the sake of your countries. Do you know why, and this is the thing that I want to end my, do you know why those super democratic countries supported the dictators in our countries? It is not just for their interest of, trading, no. Because through dictatorship, they can have the hands to our treasury. Because there is because they just want phone call. Saudi, King of Saudi Arabia, please give us $1 billion to solve this problem or to do this. And there is no accountability from the people. While they couldn't do that in their countries. They have accountability. They have rule of law. So as they deserve democracy in their countries, as they define democracies in their countries, we deserve this democracy and we define this democracy. So don't let dictators and military coups, and don't think that military coups will bring you democracy or prosperity. They are lying. And we have the same scene in Egypt. It's African Arabic country. As Sisi said and promised people, okay, I will make this coup against, the fairest Democrat president in the history of Egypt. He made that coup with the promise of economic progress. Did he bring economic progress? The opposite. The economic become to the lowest degree of of Egyptian, economic, system. Did he give the people liberties? No. He closed all the kind of freedom there. Most of the opponents, not just the Islamic people, but the same with the liberal, the leftist, most of them are in the prison. The same thing in Tunisia. The same thing in Sudan. Look, and sorry, I will open many things. Look. They were against our Arab Spring democracy and aspiration because they said that the Arab Spring resulted the Islamist parties to rule the countries. We told them, no, this is the will of people. Let the people choose who will rule them. Then the people will decide even if he's right or left, Islamist, liberalist, nationalist, anyone, then the people with democracy mechanism will have the mechanism to take him out by election. But give them the chance. They said, no. And they made conspiracy with the counter-revolution, superpowers in region like Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and Iran. They made that, and they topple most of the Arab Spring under this contest. Or the result will be the Islamists. We are afraid, and while the reality, no, they are afraid of democracy. Because when Sudan, the Arab Spring was against the Islamist party, there, they also became against the Sudanese revolution. So they don't want democracy to prevail in our countries. Because some of them said that we don't deserve democracy and freedom. We have to show them that we are equal, and we citizenship. And we love them, and they have to love us. So it's very important, and again, when I'm talking, and I'm so outspoken about the Western democratic system and policy. Governments, now they are seeing the genocide that happened in Palestine, and they didn't do anything enough to stop this genocide. And the only country who said stop from the beginning is South Africa. It's South Africa, and thanks to South Africa. Yeah. Thanks to you. Because you know how people suffer in Palestine. And you witness this kind of suffer. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone, to every country, to every policy, to every media, to every organization who really want democracy to prevail as a human essential. It is a necessity. Democracy is not luxury. It is necessity. Yes, this is so. It is not a result. It is necessity for everyone in the planet. Democracy is freedom. Democracy is dignity, and we have to defend on it. Otherwise, we will lose our freedom and we will lose our dignity.
I'm very sorry for those who are going to call on for further questions, but the organizers are making sort of cut-off noises at me, and also, who could possibly follow that? But the nice thing is that you will have the opportunity. I think that the really important questions, with all due respect to yourself and the wonderful panelists, the really important questions you need to ask are of each other. So I know that you've got the next 4 or 5 days to do that. I want to thank this amazing panel. This has been one of these life-defining experiences for me. I have enjoyed it so much. I've enjoyed your wisdom, your insights. So I hope you feel as nourished and as full of ideas as I do, having heard this. And I wish you well with the rest of your conference. You will be seeing more of us fellows from STIAS. We'll be working with you on your projects and your proposals a little bit later in the week. But for now, you're on to the next thing, and I hope you have a chance to catch your breath before you do that.
Thank you very much, the panel, and for Helen for moderating. So there will be, for the attendees here, lunch outside. The speakers will go together with Heidi. Where do we have Heidi? For another lunch meeting. And the youth fellows will go with me on a bus tour to Cape Town, bring the lunch bag for our continued work in the conference. So attendees, welcome to the lunch, and you will be following Heidi, and thank you so much for coming here.